Welcome to the Seaward Webinar Chapter 5. Within this webinar we will be covering PAT testing's most frequently asked questions. So, agenda for the webinar then is obviously the presentation will cover the 5 most common questions that Seaward's Customer Care Centre receives inquiries normally on a daily basis. So, FAQ number 1. Is PAT a legal requirement and what are the standards? Something that is very commonly asked, searched on. So hopefully, within this chapter, within this section, we'll be able to clear up some of the burning questions you may have. So, although PAT is not specifically mentioned in the Electricity at Work Regulations 1989, there is a legal requirement in Regulation 4 Paragraph 2 to maintain equipment. To meet these requirements, an effective portable appliance testing regime is essential, allowing us to identify any equipment that needs maintenance and take the appropriate action. We also have legal responsibility under the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations to perform risk assessments. So, what standards do we have that look or cover PAT testing? The main one that's sort of known as the Bible for PAT testing is the IET Code of Practice. This is now on the 4th edition. The IET Code of Practice for in-service inspection and testing. One other question that comes up quite a lot is obviously testing medical equipment where you have sort of patient applied parts. Some deem this to be under PAT testing, but it is actually a standard or has a standard or two covering it in itself. So medical equipment, you have got the EN 62353 and the EN 60601. We do have a guide to testing medical equipment through our brand of Rigel. So if you are testing medical equipment, definitely worth a look there. We then move on to the production line testing. Obviously all electrical equipment that is manufactured is tested end of line production. But again, this is sort of goes a bit above and beyond standard PAT testing. And you have a few standards, the EN 60353, the EN 60950 and the EN 50191. Now the EN 50191 really covers more about the environment and the setup of the test area. So again, if you're in the production line manufacturing, end of line production testing, then those are the standards you need to be looking for. Hire equipment then also has its own code of practice and guidance notes. This is produced by the Hire Association Europe. They have their own code of practice, but it's very much based around the IET code of practice. And then you need to look at various scenarios. If you're testing after repair, again that all needs to be logged and carried out to the relevant standards. And then of course the most important thing of all is actually the record keeping itself. Absolutely vital that you keep all your records of failed equipment and equipment that's passed. If you are carrying out repairs, it is very highly recommended that you don't sort of carry out the repair and then test it and pass it. Log the failure, then do the repair and carry out the test, just so you have a record and can keep an eye on failure rates, on equipment types and things like that. So the second frequently asked question that comes up quite a bit is, how do I test electronic equipment like PCs and laptops? Very, very common question. Again, I think it's more to do with the equipment being sensitive. People are a bit sort of dubious about testing it, how they test it, would they damage it, and so on. So hopefully just to give you some pointers in the right direction here, how do I test electronic equipment? Well, any equipment which contains electronic components or has an electronic display could be classified as electronic equipment, and as such must be treated very carefully. So again, we're not talking about, it's only a PC or it's only a laptop. Anything that has electronic components or electronic display could be deemed as electronic equipment. So naturally this type of equipment can be damaged by applying the incorrect tests, or in some cases give misleading readings when they're being tested. So the IET Code of Practice tells us that this type of equipment should not be subjected to a 500 volt insulation resistance test. But if the equipment states, or you have any sort of paperwork certification with it, that the equipment is manufactured to the EN 60950 standard, then naturally it would be okay to test at 500 volts, because it would be subject to that, and in some cases maybe higher when the manufacturer is carrying out end of line production. So, you know, very much worth keeping an eye out for the standard there to help you decide. So, where a 500 volt insulation resistance test is not appropriate and could potentially damage the equipment, you should consider one or more of the below alternative methods. A visual only, obviously depending on its environment and the risk assess process and whether you can be deemed a visual only is sufficient. On most modern pat testers now, you do get the option of a 250 volt insulation test. So again, worth keeping an eye on that. If you are testing IT equipment or anything sensitive, then really you do need to be looking at your tester to have the facility of a 250 volt insulation test, because obviously sensitive equipment is becoming very, very common. You've got the touch current or phase earth current test, so both leakage tests available there. And then another option you have got is the substitute leakage test, which is obviously the leakage test, but off the batteries at 40 volts rather than mains and powering up the equipment. You may come across some Class 1 equipment which has no exposed earth metal parts, so therefore this makes the earth continuity test impossible to carry out. Many people, and believe me, we've had it many times, sit there and say we'll treat the item as Class 2 instead, but this is bad practice and creates false results in your database. Instead, we should omit the earth continuity test and record a supporting comment, basically to say that, you know, there are no exposed metal parts, so therefore we have omitted the earth continuity test, and then carrying out a proper insulation test on a Class 1 product. The duty holder must then alter their risk assessment relating to this item, stating that the earth continuity has been omitted and the reasons why. So also, when testing electronic equipment, it is common to have a number of connected items. For example, your laptops, chargers, IEC kettle leads, that sort of thing. So the IET Code of Practice states that each item should be tested and labelled individually. Again, it's very common if you've got your normal IEC kettle lead plugged into your back of your PC, people will treat it as one item. But with the cable being detachable, they should all be tested separately as the PC and as the lead, and obviously labelled appropriately for each item. When using pat testers with programmable sequences, like our Apollo series of testers, you can actually write and configure your own test sequences specifically for electronic equipment. Now, this will ensure that you always carry out the right tests and avoid damaging equipment. So again, you can set it up with 250 volt insulation tests, you can set it up with leakage tests, however you feel fit, but they are programmable. So moving on now to FAQ number 3. Should I only test equipment with a plug-on? What about fixed equipment? A very hot topic when the 4th edition Code of Practice was released back in 2012. So, one of the big myths surrounding PAT is that we only have to test items with a plug-on. So, important point here. The Electricity at Work Regulations 1989 covers all electrical systems at work, and therefore the law does not differentiate between equipment with a plug and that which is wired directly to the supply. Many companies still fail to include fixed equipment in their risk assessments and asset registers, leaving themselves wide open if something were to go wrong. Naturally, obviously fixed equipment is harder to test, as we do not have the convenience of a plug, which can be used to isolate the equipment and then attach it to the test socket on the PAT tester. The inspection and tests carried out on fixed equipment are the same as those used for plug connected equipment, but the key challenges here are the safe isolation procedures and actually connecting the test equipment to the fixed appliance itself. So, again, need to point out here, to comply with the Electricity at Work regs, Regulation 16, those testing fixed equipment must be competent to do so. The starting point for testing fixed equipment must be a thorough risk assessment. So remember, in some cases, the risk of doing the test may actually be higher than the risk of not doing it. So again, you've got to think of working at heights, have people got access to it? Can they physically, be hurt by a fixed appliance? Is it out of reach? So often many things can be changed or altered to the installation or equipment which will better facilitate this type of testing or reduce the risk. For example, you can include better labelling on the distribution board, you can add in additional isolators, and maybe obviously the use of extra RCDs. The creation of a fixed equipment health and safety policy is also highly recommended. So what I mean by that is, not just say we're going to include it in our test program, but actually right around actually doing the testing. So, you have to be trained in safe isolation. Equipment at height needs certain things, that the introduction of additional equipment for reducing risk can be considered. So it's not just a risk assessment and say we need to pat test them. So moving on from there then, the fixed equipment testing itself, there is a best practice guide 2 from Electrical Safety First, which contains industry guidance on safe isolation practice. Again, it's a free download off the Electrical Safety First website. And those performing safe isolation should be trained to do so and have the necessary equipment to perform the activity safely. If you're ever in doubt, get the equipment isolated by a qualified electrician, but always check the isolation before starting any work. Once safely isolated, you can then carry out a full visual inspection as detailed in the IET Code of Practice. So on successful completion of the visual inspection, it is necessary to make a temporary connection between the equipment and the pat tester. The range of Seaward Apollo testers have the point-to-point feature, which makes connections nice and simple. Removes the risk of having to use or invest in installation testers. The facility is built in within the pat tester. And of course, great care must be taken to ensure the correct test connections are made and that no shock risk is posed during any testing. So, point-to-point connections and when carrying out a Class 1 a fixed appliance test. So for Class 1 equipment, an earth continuity test is performed between the earth conductor and the earth metal parts of the equipment. And the insulation resistance test is carried out between the live conductors joined together and the earth conductor for Class 1 or exposed metal parts for Class 2. Once the equipment has been safely reconnected and re-energised, you can then perform the functional check. So what we have actually created, as you can see there, the link on the page there, we have actually produced a video on sort of steps for safe isolation procedures and actually carrying out the tests with our Apollo Pat tester. So please do have a look at that if you are looking at fixed appliance testing. And obviously we do have to note at this point that the video is for demonstration purposes only and is not designed to replace any sort of formal safe isolation procedure training. The safe isolation procedure training is obviously vital for complying with competency requirements. The video here is just merely showing you sort of the testing side and obviously, how it differentiates to a normal box standard pat test on an appliance with a plug. So FAQ number 4 then, how do I make sure my pat tester is accurate and working correctly? Again, we get asked this quite a bit. So any test equipment which is relied on for safety must be accurate if danger is to be avoided. The test equipment's accuracy is measured and if necessary adjusted during a process called calibration. So again, the calibration side there is done annually, and again is very common. But Seaward recommend that our instruments are calibrated annually, and if there's any reason to doubt their accuracy, such as after damage or misuse. Calibration involves sending your tester to a Seaward approved laboratory, and on completion you will receive a calibration certificate, which obviously must be kept in a nice safe place. Calibration, however, only proves that your tester was accurate at the time of test and is not proof of ongoing accuracy. Before each use, you should perform a simple user inspection of the tester to ensure there are no physical defects and that all the leads are in good condition and nothing's hanging out or damaged. Ongoing accuracy should be checked with a check box, and the results must be recorded. Ongoing accuracy should be checked with a checkbox, and the results must be recorded, as we said there. Sorry, repeating that bit there. And you can see there with the checkbox, that's just an example of one of the checkboxes we have that enables you just to do, weekly checks, daily checks, before use checks. It's all dependent on how much you use the pat tester, but they're very, very good products to have on board, because again, like you say, you can check your ongoing accuracy of your pat testers. So FAQ number 5 then, again something we deal with quite heavily in the office here up at head office, which is which pat tester's right for me, what are the differences? For those that are involved in pat or looking at pat testing at the moment, you would have probably seen, there are a number of pat testers out there in the range. Which one's right for me, what makes one different from the other, and why would I look at, spending £200 or £1,000? So all pat testers will do 2 basic tests. You have the earth continuity test and your insulation resistance test. So why do some pat testers cost a few £100 and others cost over £1,000? Well, there are many different factors to consider when choosing the right tester for you. Take into consideration all aspects and seek advice from Seaward and our distribution partners if you're not sure. We are here to help and guide you down the right routes. So, things to consider when making your decision on what sort of equipment do I need to buy. Do you need a 250 volt insulation resistance test? Again, something we mentioned earlier on in the webinar was more and more things now are electronic, more and more things now could be sensitive to high voltages, and again, very common now, primarily in offices, but again can stretch above and beyond that, is surge protected leads. Anything with a surge protected device in is obviously designed to do its job and kick in if you get a spike in the mains. So of course, if you try shunting 500 volts down it from a pat tester, you could damage not only the surge device in the lead, but you'd get all sort of weird and wonderful readings and failures on your insulation resistance. So again, a 250 volt insulation test is really something to consider having in your pat tester. Do you need to test 110 volt equipment? And again, with adapters, most pat testers will test 110 volt equipment, but do you want to power up the 110 volt equipment? Do you want to give it a run test? Do you test equipment after repair or hire equipment? Because again, you may require the facility to carry out the flash testing. Flash is obviously less common in routine testing, not to be sort of carried out routinely at all, because you can put stress and, over time eventually wear down the appliance. So again, it's just after repair and hire equipment and things like that. In the hire industry, they tend to do flash tests, if they are changing brushes and drills, for example, and putting the drill back together. Another one that's becoming very common now is RCDs. So if you have plug-in RCDs or RCD protected extension leads, again, part of the pat test procedure in the IET Code of Practice is that you actually carry out the trip time test of that RCD. One other thing to factor in as well is the long leads. Long extension leads and things like that, when you're doing earth continuity testing, the longer the lead, obviously the more the resistance will be. So therefore, if you've got a tester set at 0.1 of an ohm, anything that exceeds that fails, well, you need to make sure that the pat tester enables you to overrule that. Or on the more advanced testers, you can actually set up programs for longer leads or have limit calculators built in that enables you to calculate the resistance. The last thing you want to do is be stuck with a tester that is preset with a fail parameter, and you can't overrule it or adjust it, and therefore it means you can't test anything with long leads. Do you need mains power tests like the touch or phase earth current test? Do you want to run the equipment and get leakage readings? One of the big things, obviously, which does then start to move around on price is the downloading of results. Do you want to fill in everything by hand? We normally typically tend to say if you're looking at anything sort of above 300 assets, and that's a big number, is do you want to be filling in things by hand? You'll spend as much time filling out forms and writing labels as you would be doing back testing. So again, consider that the initial cost and investment may be higher than a manual tester, but in the long run, if you're testing a number of appliances, the downloading facility will very quickly pay that back in no time. The more enhanced testers also have printers and barcode scanners, so printers that enable you to print out your labels with your test dates and everything on, initials of who did the test, asset numbers, that sort of thing. And again, the barcode scanning side, when you're printing labels with barcodes and things like that, it speeds up the whole process. When you're going around retesting, you're not putting the same data in over and over again. We have just recently introduced QR codes to the Apollo 500 and 600. So again, there's no need for uploading even for retesting now. You can go and scan the barcode and the QR code, and it will configure your tester for you. So again, little things like handwriting labels out after every test. When you're retesting, putting in the same data and over again, it all adds time onto the process. So again, consumables, accessories can really help and speed up the process, and of course it looks professional as well. The other bit then you've got there is, do you want to inspect and test other items like ladders or any other non-electrical equipment, PPM? In the facility that we have in the Apollo 500 and 600s is you do have the facility to log and configure any test programs that you want. So if you are doing tick sheets for ladders or writing down Legionella temperature checks or anything like that, these can be set up in the Pat Tester, asset ID downloaded, results kept, history, as an electrical appliance would do. So some really sort of key points there to consider if you are looking at Pat testing. We do have our Choose the Right Pat Tester guide available. So again, that can be viewed online or anything like that. And from an FAQs point of view, what we are trying to really help with now in the marketplace is we have a database, and we're always keeping an eye through our technical support team, through the websites, through Google, things like that, product FAQs. Now, obviously you can see the link there if you go on to the Seaward website and the FAQ section there. There's lots of useful information moving forward. And as we obtain more and we build more, further FAQs will be added, and this is an ongoing thing. It's not there and that's it, we've stopped. We're forever adding information to the FAQ part. So at this point now, I hope you all found the webinar very useful. I hope it sort of cleared up some questions you may have. Just wanted to touch on here the social media side. Please do follow us via our social channels. Webinars like you're listening to now, we actually do live. So again, through social media, you'll see those events coming up. And again, being live, it means you can ask questions as you go along, and it's very interactive. All the sort of FAQ videos and product support videos and things like that are also available. We run many workshops, hands-on workshops, morning sessions, so any events that we're doing or anything like that will also be visible through the social channels. So again, I thank you for your time. I do hope you find it useful, and look forward to